Yes.
I'm the coordinator of the research, so I'm introducing this because today is a whole line of recommendations to do research. Yeah, so this is part of the Research SIG Day of presentations, and we're very lucky to have Annamaria and Rama talk.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody for choosing this session, and you're all very welcome. I'm Annamaria, and this is Rama, in case some of you didn't know. And Richard's name is up there because actually Richard is involved in this project in quite a big way, but today he's not presenting with us, so we're just going to talk about our own thoughts in relation to some of the early data we've got. Richard was in fact the person who introduced me to Rama in December last year, and it's only since December we've been working on this project together. And the project is called Children and Teachers Becoming Researchers in India. And the idea came from really the realization that the whole field of ESL or ELT is still pretty adult dominated, especially when it comes to research. And I know we spent a whole day yesterday talking about what research was, but taking it in the broadest possible sense, I mean this. And of course, especially thinking about the research that gets published. And again, we yesterday talked about how teacher research doesn't always get published, and perhaps it shouldn't be. But I'm making this statement about the published research in ESL and EFL that's out there. And where children are participants in research, they're very often very passive participants in research in the handful of articles and chapters that we do find with children as participants. And I think it's interesting for us to think why this is. To some extent, of course, this is obvious because we are the adults who are in control and should be in control of their lives. But actually, there are some very exciting possibilities out there to involve children much more actively in research and classroom investigations of all sorts. There are 4 different ways children can be, if you like, participants or people participating in research. The first possibility is that they're just passive objects, and this is really the majority of the research published. The second possibility is that they can be subjects, which means that the researchers take more interest in them as individuals, perhaps look at them more broadly, not just their classroom involvement, but try to get to know them a little bit. So typically the object status would come out of research where lots of children are tested in some sort of quantitative way, and the subject status would come out of research where a researcher is working with a smaller group of children, trying to get to know them and using various different, perhaps qualitative ways of understanding them. But I think it would be possible still to argue that in both these cases, we're still looking at them very much from an adult perspective. It is still the adults, us, who propose the question, who propose how the research should be done, who propose what data should be collected, how to interpret this data and what to do with it. And it's only when children become active participants that this changes. That actually is a step further, which means that somehow we try and involve them in the research process. And then there is the intriguing idea of making them into co-researchers, which would mean that they're actually in charge of the research themselves. Now, I'm not suggesting that all the research other than the last one is not relevant or not meaningful. Of course, whether they're objects, subjects, active participants, or co-researchers, all that is very useful research. I'm not negating or not rejecting the earlier versions. But I think it's an interesting thing for us all to think about what we believe about children, because our own beliefs and interpretations will either explicitly or implicitly influence how we're going to work with them. So if we fear them, if we think they need control, if we think they're vulnerable, if we think they're irresponsible, we will try and control them and use methods that will give them very little leeway. But if we actually believe they're responsible, they can contribute, and they can make very sensible suggestions, we might then change our methods. And I don't see this as one or the other, but a kind of a continuum. So just to give you a few ideas of the kinds of things that we've tried to do in the past, if you try and involve the children somehow more actively than just give them a test or a task, you might be using participatory methods, which can be really useful because you can use drawings or stories or filmmaking as possible ways of gathering data. You can also, in a very small way, involve them when you designed your own instrument and you give it to the children and say, hey, what do you think of it? Would you like to look at this? Do you think this would work with other children like yourselves? So children can also comment and change adult-initiated designed instruments. And children have also successfully, in our experience, interviewed each other, so they're quite capable to go away with a few questions and ask another class or another group of children. And again, and in a small way, this is actually involving them much more actively in the process. And in some research, we found that children will propose and bring to the surface new ideas, new angles, very much surprising the adults with their ideas and their initiatives. So based on all this, I've come up with this sort of diagram which shows that this is really a continuum. You need to start, if you're interested in this, you need to start in a small way, perhaps with a project where the children are aware and interested and participate in your investigation in some way. And when they've been familiarized into this, then perhaps they can take a little bit more responsibility, and then maybe someday they'll be fully fledged researchers, but I'll be the first one to admit that that's not feasible or possible, or even may not be the goal for everyone. So when we first met in December, we started thinking about how we could maybe work on something with Indian teachers who are already experienced teachers and enjoy investigating their own classrooms. And we sort of came up with a schedule that Rama and I discussed ideas for a week and read each other's work and sort of brainstormed possibilities. And then Rama went back to India and started working with a group of teachers, and this is the schedule we drew up. From February and in February and March, they had several meetings and started working on different projects with children, involving them as co-investigators in their classrooms. And then there's going to be a new phase now when Rama goes back, so it's the first phase we're reporting on. And we see this as a developing project, so in July there'll be workshops where teachers will be presenting on the new work, and possibly children will be invited to show mini projects and ideas that came out so far. And we're also planning to get together in 2015 and involve all the teachers in a joint presentation at a conference. So I'll be quiet now and hand over to Rama, who's going to talk about the study and the data we've got.
The work began in December when I went back after the discussions. I sort of sent out a letter. In fact, they asked me, because this also is a continuation in a sense of another project that I had done with some teachers. We had done a diary writing project, and so they incidentally told me, aren't we going to continue this kind of work? Shall we get together? And this sort of coincided with that. And so these teachers who had already worked on this project and many others showed interest. So in a sense, they're all volunteers, and they decided to work on this. When I tried to tell them, would you like to work on children as researchers? Would you like to enable them to become researchers? They were quite excited. So these teachers ranged from grade 1 to grade 8. Although we say young learners, probably grade 8 teachers are not very young learners teachers, but something like 13, 14 years old. So these age ranges are from 6, 7 to 14. Mainly from state schools. These are government schools in India where the facilities are not all that great, and also these children come from sort of disadvantaged backgrounds, many of them what we call first generation learners. Their parents may or may not have gone to school at all. Such schools. In fact, one teacher or two teachers, I think, are from private schools. We have sort of kept it open for anyone to join in. We are not trying to, define the kind of target in very strict terms. They are in early grades. They are co-ed schools, both boys and girls schools. And when they come to grade 6 in government schools, they are usually all boys or all girls schools. So what did we do? Before I go on to this, I'll just tell you what we did. We brainstormed ideas for what they could be doing. So they all sort of showed interest, and then they said, I could do this, I could do that, I could ask them if they like what we do, and so on, all to do with their curriculum, their textbooks, their daily routine, and so on. In fact, February and March, I realized, were not a great time. This morning, somebody was talking about it, actually. I think the Chile experience. We began in January, but then they were all getting ready for these exams. In India, even in lower classes, exams take on a very large role, and then they prepare for it. Prepare as in the syllabus is finished, and then there's a lot of revision, preparation, mock exams and everything, and ending in exams in March, even for very young children. And then they go off on a vacation. Children are on a short vacation after they finish their exams in March, and they come back. Now, yesterday they would have begun their new term. So there wasn't that much time to begin and think about this project. So what we are presenting as data is sort of limited, but it definitely shows some very clear positive trends. So that's what we would like to share with you. In fact, one teacher told me, I'll pick this up in April after all the discussions, because revision is going on in my school. So I said, why don't you work about revision? Why ask students about revision? Do they like it? She said they hate it. They just don't like it. Then I said, why don't you find out what else they would like to do in revision? So that became a small study. So in this way, we sort of located the project, the questions, in their own context, very specific context, and then that emerged into a very small study. Another teacher said she's been very prescriptive, and therefore she wanted to ask them what kinds of stories do they like. She does give them lots of storybooks, but she never tried to find out, what kinds of storybooks she liked. So she decided to ask them about that, and then they started work on that. So very small studies of this kind. I'll give you more details as we go along. So 15 teachers began, many of them from a previous diary writing project. I think I've described all this. Initial reactions of teachers, they were very excited about the idea of getting learners to research. So they were not only volunteers, but they also believed in idea, at least, in getting learners to get a voice. In fact, it looked like half of them, if not all of them, already were doing something of the sort. They were very student-friendly teachers, but not in the kind of way that we did in the project, they realized later. So once we decided on this, they also decided what kind of schedule they have to make for this, how much class time should be kept for this, is it something separate? Should they take permission from principals or not? In Delhi especially, government schools, it's almost impossible to get any permission for the so-called research. So they said, if you write a letter, I also happen to be the dean of the faculty, I have some kind of an official relationship with the Directorate of Education. So I said I could write a letter to the director, from where it will filter down to the regional director, then to the principal, then to them. But they said, don't do this, then we won't be allowed at all. So teachers were making such decisions about in what kind of context they will be able to work in. This also put some constraints on us, because I had planned some video recording of classes. That was not possible at all. But then the teacher said, we have got our mobile phones, and since we can do whatever we like with our classes, I'll use it for recording my class and nobody can stop it. Of course, it's going to be used here. Now I'm going to show a short video of the classroom. I don't know whether it's ethical or not. I'm also in a very ethical kind of dilemma about all these things, but all these have happened. So they took responsibility. In each case, it's different. Although they're all in a government system, each teacher's school and the kind of context and, so they made decisions about how this should be approached. Data collection methods were they wrote diaries. These teachers, as they asked their questions, got students into groups and made them answer questions, whatever. So we have some diaries on that. And they use mobile phones for recording. And in 2 classes, students decided to have a questionnaire which they designed and gave out to their classmates. These are some of the outcomes of this. Teacher learning. I just wanted to read this actually. In this case, the first quote from the teacher herself, she, as I told you, she had given them lots of storybooks and but never tried to find out what they like about stories. And then she realized, when she asked them, she realized that this gives a very clear picture of what their likes and dislikes are. This was another one where the teacher had asked them to find out from others, not only their classmates but from others, based on a story that they had done on bestseller. I think this is O. Henry's story, or I forget now. So they were trying to find out from others what a bestseller is and what goes into it and so on. So they had done this in teams, and she tried to get some kind of feedback about how teams worked, didn't work, what were the issues. So she got a lot of insight into this. This is again a teacher's quote, teacher herself saying. Now the second one is a teacher where she was quite shocked when she asked this question, because although she is a sort of modern teacher, she doesn't think, and she does convey that memorizing and copying things from the board is not learning. Students they firmly believe this. So when she genuinely asked them, this is what came out, and she was quite shocked. Now in April, she's going to address this question. She hasn't done quite done a study yet, but she's going to begin with that. This is a kind of an exchange, student exchange. It's in Hindi. We have translated it. They are talking about their learning. We can learn by copying and writing, basically by following the script. She says, the teacher says, how? When you write on the blackboard, we'll copy and write, and we'll learn by following it. Then another student is saying, but copying is not in itself learning. So they are trying to, address this question. Another one. If you want me to read it in Hindi, I can. Tell me something, how will we get to know? Because it doesn't sound right in English to me. But this is... Shall I? अच्छा, एक बात बताओ, हमें कैसे पता चलेगा कि हमें इंग्लिश समझ में आने लगी है और हम इंग्लिश सीख रहे हैं? मैम, जब हमसे कोई बात करेगा और हम जवाब दे देंगे इंग्लिश में. अब बात करोगी तो हम अगर बोलेंगे तो आपको पता चल जाएगी. आपको चल जाएगा पता. Okay? So they're trying to evaluate their own learning. They're trying to find ways of evaluating their learning. So we saw that the earlier exchanges, in fact, it's a longish kind of a piece which has been recorded. It was a good discussion on meta-language, metacognition. These were children of 7 years old. 7-year-old children engaging in a discussion where they are talking about learning. Another one, this is making choices and preferences. Why did you like this book so much? Do you eat all the vegetables? This is apparently a book called Go Green, lots of vegetables and everything. And they seem to like that of all the books that they have read, and they're discussing it. So they're saying, ma'am, we eat sometimes, not these many at one time. They seem to be eating so many vegetables during one meal. And the other thing that amused them was that the dog also is eating vegetables here. One more thing, if I may say here, these children come from not so rich backgrounds. They don't get to eat all the vegetables at one time. So the teachers told us that they seem to be very, taken up by this idea that there were so many vegetables to eat. I don't know, I'll show you a 1 minute worth video of this. This is a teacher getting the students to make puppets. She had only 1 or 2 puppets in the classroom, and the students said, but why the same puppet every time? So then she said, but would you like to make puppets? Yes, they said yes, and there's a puppet making class going on, and then now they've all got their puppets ready. For the next session, they're going to decide how different puppets should be used differently for different classes. So that's the decision they have made. Oh, sorry. Where is it? I don't know if we have time. Is it time? She said it's not working. Oh, here I should do. It's not a very good one. Switch off the light, it will show better. Here, I'll show you later if you want. Another teacher is saying there was a one teacher investigated the revision process. There were 7 students volunteered, then they broke the other students into groups, and they found out they ended up with 5 or 7 ways of revising. The next thing they went and did was they liked the teacher to bring new materials for revision, not the same old materials that were taught earlier. So they collected lots of pamphlets and brochures and books from McDonald's and Barista and some other places. And they even suggested what you can do with each of the pamphlets, how to teach. So they said, you do the revision this way. For example, metro timetable, metro trains. They said, you can teach us to and from this. And then you can... So they had lots of ideas on that, and they're waiting for this teacher to do this. They felt a little cheated that the revision period time had got over by the time they made their suggestions, and they said, but you took so many ideas from us, but you never implemented it. So they would really like, they like teachers to be serious about whatever they suggest. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Challenges the issue of space and time with teachers to do extra work. Teachers are very engaged and very interested in this, but it's still extra work for them. They have not been able to integrate it or see it as though it can be a regular part of their work. Finding time for the team to meet together. I meet them in separate groups because there's no one day when they can all come to me or I can go to them, so that's been an issue. Notion of research in the classroom, let alone with the children, just doesn't have any kind of approval from the school authorities. So they are all doing it secretly. So now we have to see how to sort of legitimize this or take the principals in. In July, when we are going to have a 2-day seminar, I'm wondering whether we should invite principals. Many of them, many of them said, no, please don't call them. That's the end of our project. Because they'll come to know that we have done it secretly. So there are all these issues. I don't know how to. mismatch between children's and teachers' perceptions. Children like it a lot. From all the details and data that we have, it's very clear children just love it. It's not just a fun activity, but they would like to take on adults' role of having to decide, having to see what's good for them, and make those decisions. But teachers are still not able to see. So there, I see a mismatch. And as I said, ethical questions. Next steps. Can there be training for learners, just like there is research methodology for teachers? I know there's enough work done on this, but we have to see when to have that kind of a thing. Learners as participants in the July seminar. Now we are going to have a 2-day seminar in July. So we are hoping to call some students over to tell us what their perception was. So it will be a very interesting seminar where there are teachers and students as participants. And they do like acknowledgement of the work that they did. As I told you, from the diary writing project, now they want to, each of them, write a full chapter in a book. So they do want to see a goal at the end of this whole thing, and they want to belong to a community of practice or community of researchers. So there is that angle to it. It's not there is no incentive. It's a kind of a self more driven incentive, but it's there. That's it. Thank you.
Great.
5 minutes we have for discussion. So if there are...
We're allowed to have questions. I don't know whether there's time. Yeah.
Fauzi.
Yeah, I'm going to start with your last point, the ethics of this all, this research. For me, it does raise a lot of ethical questions, particularly in the kind of environments in which we are, the developing country context, where research in itself is something which is threatening and so on. And if it's covert and you haven't got permission, for example, do the children's parents know that the children are being videoed and presented in a conference abroad? I think that's a very big ethical issue for me. They want publications and recognition. How can that happen unless the research is known and shared? Research is for dissemination, it is for sharing. So I really feel that those problems or those ethical questions need to be sorted out, and I'm sure there are ways of doing that, because I would really be worried if you carried on the project without that.
You want to answer that?
Yes. No, I agree with you. There are very important ethical issues, but in addition to what you've just said, there's also the fact that in different parts of the world, ethics is looked at very differently. And what we think, for example, in the UK, any research project will have to go through an ethical board for approval. And we've had many situations where we felt that piece of research that was done overseas just couldn't meet all the criteria that we wanted, for example, in the UK. So I've had many parents in my work, many parents who come to me and who said, please use my child's name because we're so proud of him being part of your research that I want them to be named and to be showcased. And they just don't understand, and they don't want to appreciate that as research participants they need to be anonymous and they need to be protected. So it's extremely complicated, but I agree with what you said. Yeah, and it is an issue for continuing, that it can't continue in this way.
Sorry, I just beg to differ with your thing about the research ethics, local standards and gold standards, and because I feel very strongly about that. I think that even in local contexts like India, and India is a big research community, it's not a small place. Even in Pakistan and other places, there are standards that we as researchers need to follow. We might contextualize them, we might localize them, but I think we might not have ethical standards committees to go through, but I think the ethical standards are there to be followed.
Yeah, they are, but they're often different.
And they might be different, but in the sense that if people want their names to be known, yes, because we have their permission and they want them to be recognized. So they don't have to be anonymous. That would not bother me.
Yeah.
But I really would not want to think that just because the research is being done overseas, that we should not follow the ethical standards that we as researchers adhere to wherever we come from.
Can I just give you one more example? We've also had instances where research participants, for example, don't want to sign a document because they're not comfortable about signing.
But we have ways of going around that now in our ethics, and there are ways of handling those situations.
I think I would like to reword this term as not ethical question but ethical dilemmas. Because for each of us, whether you come from UK, USA or some other country, there are ethical dilemmas which are not so easily resolved. There's no very cut and dried do's and don'ts for ethics. We might think there is, but then they are very different, and more so in different contexts. Even in our schools, the 8 schools that we have done this work in 3 or 4 schools, the principal is very happy. In fact, parents are going to be involved in this now, and students have gone and talked to their parents, and so the story is very different. In another school, it's the teacher says, I can do what I like in the classroom. I have that kind of privilege. So I don't need to tell them whether I'm video recording this class or anything. So she's taking a very firm stand. I'm not saying that she's right and we should not worry about it, but the journey is on. I think it's begun. Even as action research people, these teachers have had lots of difficulties. So they are trying to sort it out. I think we will tell them what needs to be done. Even Delhi University, for example, now is coming up with something. But again, when it comes to schools, there are no definite, clear answers. Schools don't want their classrooms, seen as research places at all. It's very sad, but then that's how it is. Because for various reasons, they do not want outsiders.
And if I could add on to that, because I too come from India, many of these contexts are very people-driven, and the systemic approach is not really in place. Therefore, to expect professional uptake from the other party is always a difficulty.
Correct.
So you've got to always, try and take the middle path. And the fact that this research seems to be yielding some very important insights may, in a way, result in a buy-in as we go along. That's a possibility.
And then,
Yeah.
so very short. And then, if the children will participate, being part of the project as well, if they wanted to participate, why is not valid as if they were able, for example, if they were able to talk to their parents and make them parents to participate?
Yeah.
I think that if they are part of the project, they have the right to say whether they want to be in it or not.
It's just that they don't know the official thing about signing or acknowledging that I'm giving their consent. These ideas are all very new to them. They are not.
I still think the criteria for teacher research and learner research in this case, I think it should fit the context where it is located. I don't think there is such a thing as worldwide criteria for research. And if this fits the context and it is applies to your reality, and it is what it is used where they are, I think it just fits the pattern of criteria for research anyway.
Sheila?
I would see a much bigger problem if you've been treating these children as objects or subjects. What I see there could be interpreted as very exciting teaching, upon which you happen to have kept some records. So, because you're at that end of the participation research thing, I think maybe not different standards, but different considerations apply.
Yeah. In fact, they have written reports on their questionnaire studies. I haven't been able to show them all because there hasn't been time, but we will be putting it all together. There is quite a bit of that documentation actually.
Yes?
Just to say, I find it very, very interesting, and I see this as a tool for teacher development. Aside from the research questions, I think teachers who work in low resource environments where they may not be supported externally by whatever organisations might actually be able to draw a huge amount of input from their learners, independently of anything else, about how well their teaching is going and how they can improve that. So my question was, are you going to actually get the teachers involved in feedback on what they've learned from the project itself and whether they've actually gained a lot from it? Because there are some teachers who would be adverse to the idea of asking their children
actually.